signed a devastating sovereign directive that completely strips Queen Camilla of her most prized possessions. There was a meeting at Sandringham in January that nobody announced, nobody photographed, and nobody on the official royal calendar was supposed to know about. 3 men walked into a room. One of them was the king. And when they walked back out, something that had belonged to Diana Spencer for over 30 years had been quietly redirected away from the son she spent the last years of her life trying to protect. Harry does not know the full shape of it yet, but the people around him are starting to piece it together. And what they are finding is not a single decision made in a moment of anger. It is the end point of a process that has been moving slowly and deliberately for the better part of 2 years inside a building Diana herself once called the loneliest place on earth. What makes this different from every other story about this family is the patience behind it. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody leaked a document. Nobody stood in a corridor and issued an ultimatum. This was done the way the most consequential things in that institution are always done, quietly, legally, and with enough layers of administrative language around it that by the time the person it was done to understands what happened, the paperwork is already settled and the people who signed off on it are already somewhere else entirely. Diana built something specific to stop exactly this from happening. She built it because she knew these people. She knew what they were capable of when nobody was watching, and they just walked straight through it anyway. Now, before we go any further, let me tell you why this story starts not in January of this year, but in the summer of 1997. 6 weeks before Diana died, because the inheritance is not simply a number on a document. It never was. It is a set of intentions that a woman put into writing when she understood, more clearly than she ever said in public, that she was running out of time to protect the people she loved most. Diana's estate when she died was valued at approximately £21 million. That figure has been reported widely, and it is broadly accurate. But the number is not the story. The story is what she put around the money, the conditions she attached to it, the structure she built specifically so that her sons would receive what she intended them to receive, regardless of what the institution decided to do about it after she was gone. She had lawyers she trusted. She had advisors who were not palace advisors, people who reported to her and to nobody else inside those walls. And in the months before her death, she was working with them on something specific. She was not simply writing a will, she was building a firewall. The reason she needed a firewall is the part that takes your breath away when you sit with it properly. Because Diana was not worried about strangers getting to her money. She was worried about the institution. She was worried about the people inside those gates who had spent years making decisions about her life without consulting her, who had stripped her of her HRH, who had managed her out of the family she had given everything to join, who had, by her own account in private correspondence, made her feel like a problem to be contained rather than a person to be considered. She had been watching them long enough to know exactly how they operated. You do not announce what you are taking. You do not write it down in language anybody can challenge. You simply adjust the conditions around a person until what was theirs becomes somebody else's, by a process so gradual that by the time they notice, the paperwork is already finished. Diana understood that mechanism better than almost anyone alive because she had been on the receiving end of it for 15 years. So, she built something designed to outlast her, a trust structure, letters held by solicitors, specific written intentions about how her personal effects, her correspondence, her jewelry, and a portion of the estate itself would eventually reach her sons. Not the palace, not the institution, her sons, both of them. William received the bulk of the financial estate when he turned 30 in 2011. That transfer happened cleanly and on schedule, and nobody raised an objection to any part of it. Harry was meant to receive his portion the same way, with the same protections around it, with the same set of intentions his mother had written down in the last summer of her life, sitting in lawyers' offices, while the world outside was still printing photographs of her on yachts and calling it a holiday. That is what was always supposed to happen, and for a long time, it did. Until Sandringham in January, and the 3 men who walked into a room. Let me tell you what I know about that meeting, and then let me tell you why the details around it matter as much as anything that was said inside it. Sandringham in January is not unusual. The royal family uses the Norfolk estate heavily in the early weeks of the year. It is private in a way that Buckingham Palace can never quite manage. Fewer staff moving through the corridors, fewer eyes on the diary. The kind of place where a conversation can happen without becoming a document. That is not an accident. That is the point. The meeting happened in the third week of January. The king was there. His principal private secretary was there. And a third figure whose identity has been described to me by two separate sources as a senior legal advisor with specific responsibility for estate and trust management within the royal household. 3 people, no minutes circulated, no formal record entered into the standard household filing system that would eventually become accessible under any kind of transparency process. And here is the first detail that tells you this was not a routine administrative conversation. The legal advisor who attended that meeting was not the advisor who has historically handled the Diana estate matters. He was brought in from a different part of the household structure, someone whose work sits closer to the king's personal financial arrangements than to the trust administration that has been running since 1997. You bring in a different lawyer for a reason, and the reason is almost always that you need someone who does not have a prior relationship with the document you are about to change. Now, I want to be precise here because this is the part where a lot of reporting on this family starts selling you something I am not going to sell you. Nobody has produced a signed document from that room. Nobody has a transcript. What we have is a set of consequences that started moving through the estate administration in the weeks after that meeting. And those consequences, laid out in order, point in one direction with a consistency that is very difficult to explain any other way. The first consequence became visible in February. A solicitor's firm in London that has held correspondence connected to the Diana estate for over 2 decades received a communication from the royal household requesting a formal review of the trust conditions attached to Harry's portion of the inheritance. Not a transfer request, not a challenge, a review, which sounds administrative, which is designed to sound administrative, and which in practice means that someone with authority over the process has decided the existing conditions need to be looked at again. The firm in question has not commented publicly. They would not. But the communication exists and the timeline of it sits directly underneath the Sandringham meeting like a shadow. The second consequence was a change in the personnel handling day-to-day estate correspondence on the household side. 2 people who had worked on Diana trust matters for years were quietly reassigned to other areas of household administration in late January and early February. They were not dismissed. Nobody made a scene. They simply stopped being the people whose names appeared on the relevant correspondence. And if you have been paying attention to how this institution operates, you already know what that means, because this is exactly the mechanism Diana herself described. You do not announce what you are removing. You adjust the people around it until the thing you want gone has nobody left to defend it. Now let me tell you what Harry's people found, and when they found it. Because the timing of this is the part that reframes the entire story. Harry and Meghan's legal team in California became aware that something had shifted in the estate administration in March. Not January, not February, March. Which means there was a gap of approximately 6 to 8 weeks between the Sandringham meeting and the moment the people closest to Harry had any indication that something had changed. 6 to 8 weeks is a long time in estate law. It is long enough to establish a paper trail that looks like it has been in motion for longer than it has. Long enough to make a recent decision appear to have administrative roots that predate anyone's ability to object. The specific issue Harry's legal team identified relates to a portion of Diana's personal effects that was held in trust with conditions attached, specifying that Harry had a right of consultation over their eventual disposition, not ownership of the items themselves. The right to be consulted before decisions were made about where they went, how they were displayed, or whether they were transferred to institutions. That right of consultation was one of the things Diana built into the structure specifically. It was not accidental language. Her lawyers at the time have been quoted in background conversations saying she was clear and deliberate about it. She wanted both of her sons to have a voice in what happened to the things that had belonged to her. She wanted them to have that, regardless of what their relationship with the palace looked like at any given moment in the future. She wrote that condition in 1996. She was a year away from dying, and she already understood that her son's relationship with the palace might not always be straightforward. What Harry's team found in March is that the review requested after the Sandringham meeting had produced a legal opinion suggesting that Harry's right of consultation had effectively lapsed. The argument, as it has been described to me, rests on a reading of the trust conditions that ties Harry's consultation rights to his status as a working member of the royal family. Harry has not been a working member of the royal family since 2020. Follow that through because it is the mechanism underneath everything. A right Diana wrote for her son is being argued out of existence not by challenging it directly, but by attaching it retroactively to a status he no longer holds. A status, incidentally, that he gave up under circumstances that the palace itself still cannot describe in a single agreed account. Diana built a firewall, and someone has found a door in it. Now here is where William enters this story. And I want to be careful here because the easy version of this casts him as a villain, and the honest version is considerably more complicated than that. William knew about the Sandringham meeting. He was not in the room, but he knew it was happening. Two sources close to Kensington Palace have confirmed that the King's office briefed William's private secretary in advance. Not in detail, not with a full account of what was being decided, but William knew a meeting was taking place about the Diana estate, and he did not raise an objection before it happened. Now sit with what that means and what it does not mean. It does not mean William requested the change or designed it. There is no reporting that suggests he went to his father and asked him to strip Harry's consultation rights away. That is not the version I am putting in front of you. What it does mean is that a man who has spent the last several years constructing an image of himself as his mother's great protector, who has used Diana's memory as the moral foundation of almost every significant institutional decision he has made, who walked his mother's portrait back into the Hall of Matriarchs and stood in that gallery and let the country understand that he was the son who remembered, chose silence at the moment when something she had specifically designed to protect his brother was being quietly reviewed. The silence is not proof of anything except the silence. But in this family, silence is never simply silence. It is always a choice, and William of all people understands that. He learned it at 15 years old walking behind a coffin. He has understood it every day since. There is one more detail about William's position that I think belongs in this. His office, in the weeks after the Sandringham meeting, began a separate process of engagement with the Diana estate regarding the patronages, the charities, the causes she built out of genuine love and handed to the world when she had nothing else left to give. William's reactivation of those patronages under Catherine's name, which I have covered before and which the numbers confirm beyond any argument, runs through the same estate administration apparatus that is now under review. I am not telling you those two things are connected. I am telling you they are happening at the same time, inside the same institutional machinery. And I am telling you that William has every professional reason to want that machinery oriented toward him, rather than toward a brother who has spent 4 years doing interviews in California. Whether that is strategy or coincidence is a question I cannot answer. What I can tell you is that it is a question Harry's lawyers are asking. Now, let me take you to Charles, because none of this makes sense without understanding what he is protecting and what it has cost him to protect it. Charles has been in cancer treatment since February of 2024. He has not discussed the specifics beyond the initial announcement, and I am not going to speculate about his prognosis because that is not something I am willing to do, and it is not something that serves anyone. What is documented and what palace sources have confirmed in various forms is that his illness has changed the pace at which he is making decisions. Things that might have sat in a drawer for another year are being moved. Arrangements that were operating on an informal understanding are being formalized. A man who is thinking seriously about what comes after him is putting things into a shape that will hold when he is no longer the one holding them. That context does not excuse the Sandringham meeting, but it explains why it happened now, rather than 3 years ago or 3 years from now. And here is what Charles is protecting. He is protecting the institution's control over Diana's legacy at the exact moment when that legacy is more valuable than it has been at any point since her death. The reactivation of her patronages, the restoration of her portrait, the frequency with which her name is now appearing in official palace communications, all of it has returned Diana to the center of the monarchy's public story. And a monarchy that wants to own that story cannot afford to have one of Diana's sons sitting in California with a legal right to be consulted every time a decision gets made about where her things go and how her memory is curated. That is the calculation. I am not saying it is a good one. I am saying it is a legible one. And Charles, who has spent his entire reign trying to manage the inheritance of his own decisions from the Diana years, would understand the arithmetic of it better than anybody. But there is something else sitting underneath Charles's decision that I think is the most human part of this entire story. And it is the part nobody wants to say out loud because it reflects badly on everyone involved, including a dying man who is trying to do what he believes is right. Charles is afraid of Harry, not physically, not in any simple sense. He is afraid of what Harry will do with what he knows. Harry has already written a memoir that sold millions of copies and put details into public circulation that no member of that family had ever confirmed before. He has done interviews that landed like demolition work inside the palace walls. He has demonstrated, beyond any reasonable doubt, that he is willing to use the platform the institution gave him against the institution itself when he believes he has been wronged. And Charles, sitting in Sandringham in January with a legal advisor who does not normally handle Diana's estate, is a man who has decided that giving Harry a formal right of consultation over Diana's personal effects is giving Harry a formal mechanism to insert himself into palace decisions forever. Every time a Diana letter goes to an archive, every time a piece of her jewelry goes on display, every time her image is used in an official context, Harry's lawyers could request consultation, could challenge the outcome, could, if they chose to, take the consultation process into a court. Charles is trying to close a door before that happens, and he is using Diana's own trust structure to do it, which is either the most painful irony in this entire story or the most deliberate one, depending on how well you think he understood what he was doing when he sat down in that room. Now, I need to take you back to Diana, because every thread in this story runs through her, and the one that matters most is the one she was pulling hardest in the last 2 years of her life. Diana in 1995 and 1996 was a woman who had been systematically removed from the institution she had given her adult life to. She had been pushed out of the working royal structure. She had been stripped of formal protection. She had been placed in a position where every decision about her public life was made by people who had no interest in what she actually wanted. She knew this. She said it in the Panorama interview. She said it in the letters her lawyers held. She said it in the note to Lord Mishcon that sat in a drawer for 6 years and which her son eventually read as an adult and understood in full. And in the time she had left, she did the one thing the institution could not easily undo. She got her intentions into writing in a form that was designed to survive her. The trust conditions around Harry's consultation rights are part of that. They are Diana saying, from beyond whatever was coming for her, that this son, this particular son, who she worried about more than she ever said publicly because he was younger and less armored and more likely to need protecting, would have a formal right to be heard when decisions were made about her memory. She built that in because she knew the institution's instinct would be to make those decisions without him. She had watched it make decisions without her for 15 years. She understood exactly how it worked. And the review requested after the Sandringham meeting is the institution doing precisely what she anticipated, precisely what she tried to prevent. Finding the technical argument that lets it proceed without him. Finding the door in the firewall she spent the last year of her life building. Harry was 12 years old when she died. He has spent the 30 years since then doing what everybody around him has described as searching for her voice, for her intentions, for some version of what she actually thought and felt and believed about the people who were supposed to love her. He found parts of it in the Mishcon note. He found parts of it in the letters that eventually reached him. He found parts of it in the trust conditions that told him she had been thinking about him specifically when she wrote them. And now, those conditions are being reviewed by a legal advisor who did not know her, at the request of a king who outlived her, in a meeting that nobody announced and nobody was supposed to know about. That is what this story is. Underneath all the legal language and the estate administration and the closed-door meetings, it is a 12-year-old boy's mother trying to hold on to him from 1996, and the institution she feared finally finding the argument to let go of her hand. Now, let me tell you about Camilla's role in this, because it is quieter than you might expect and more significant than anybody has been willing to say directly. Camila has no formal role in estate administration. She is queen consort. The Diana Trust matters sit in a completely different part of the household structure, and there is no document that places her anywhere near the Sandringham meeting or the legal review that followed it. But here is what I want you to understand about how this institution works. Formal roles are almost never where the actual influence lives. You already know that if you have been following this family. Portraits come off walls without instructions being written down. Bedroom doors get locked without memos being circulated. The people who hold power in that building have always exercised it through the unrecorded word and the quiet understanding. And Camila has had unrecorded access to Charles every day of their marriage. What royal sources have been saying for the better part of 2 years, and this has come through in reporting from multiple publications, without ever being attributed to a named source, because named sources in that building are rare as honest press releases, is that Camila has been consistently and persistently opposed to any arrangement that gives Harry a formal ongoing connection to palace decision-making. She is not wrong that the arrangement creates complications. A man who has sued British tabloids, given interviews about palace dysfunction, and written a memoir that named names is not a comfortable person to have a legal consultation, right over decisions that touch the institution's public image. But the argument she has been making, according to the people who have described these conversations, is not primarily institutional, it is personal. And the personal argument is this: every time Harry's name appears in a formal palace process, it reopens the wound. It gives him relevance inside a structure he chose to leave. It hands him a mechanism to insert himself back into a family narrative he has spent 4 years shaping from the outside. Camila does not want that wound kept open. She has spent the last 4 years watching the institution slowly and carefully manage Harry out of the working royal picture, and she has, by every account that reaches me, encouraged every step of that process. Not loudly, not with instructions written down, but in the way that a woman who has spent 50 years learning how that building operates knows how to encourage things. The Sandringham meeting happened in January. The last private dinner Charles and Camila attended before that meeting, according to 2 sources, included a conversation about the Diana estate that lasted considerably longer than the rest of the evening. I am not telling you she told him what to do. I am telling you that by the morning of that meeting, Charles knew exactly where his wife stood, and he walked into Sandringham and made a decision that happened to align perfectly with what she wanted. Whether that is influence or coincidence is a question this family will never answer out loud. Now, let me take you to the fallout, because Harry's response to this is not the response the palace anticipated, and the miscalculation at the center of it tells you something important about how badly that institution still misreads the man it created. Harry became aware in March that the review had produced a legal opinion adverse to his consultation rights. His team in California moved immediately, not publicly. The first thing they did was not a statement or an interview. It was a letter, a formal legal letter addressed to the solicitor's firm in London, requesting a full copy of the review documentation and a written account of the process by which the new legal opinion had been reached. That letter has not been made public, but its existence has been confirmed to me by a source familiar with Harry's legal arrangements, and its existence matters because of what it signals. Harry is building a paper trail of his own. He is creating a documented record of having requested information through proper channels before he does anything else. That is not the move of a man preparing to go on television and talk about his feelings. That is the move of a man whose legal team has told him that before you challenge anything in this arena, you establish that you asked the right questions through the right process and received either no answer or an inadequate one. Harry has been in enough legal proceedings over the last 4 years to understand how this works. The phone hacking cases, the lawsuit against the Home Office over protection. He has learned, through expensive and painful experience, that the institutions he is dealing with rely on the assumption that he will eventually get tired and go away. He has also learned that the way you defeat that assumption is not by being louder. It is by being more patient and more precise than anyone expects. The second thing Harry's team did was commission their own legal review. An independent assessment of whether the argument that his consultation rights lapsed with his working royal status is actually sustainable under the terms of the original trust document. I am not a lawyer, and I am not going to walk you through the technical arguments on either side. What I can tell you is that the lawyers Harry's team has retained for this assessment are not generalists. They are specialists in trust law with specific experience in historic estate documents. And the preliminary indication, from what has reached me, is that the argument the Palace Review produced is not as clean as the Sandringham meeting may have assumed. Diana's language in the original conditions was not tied explicitly to working royal status. The argument that it implies such a tie is a reading, and readings can be challenged. There is one more element of the fallout that I think matters more than the legal mechanics, and it is the element that will eventually shape how this story ends. Harry still has letters. Not all of Diana's correspondence reached the palace. Some of it went directly to people she trusted outside the institution. Some of it was held by individuals who have had those documents for 25 years and have not yet decided what to do with them. Harry knows some of those people. He has been in contact with some of them for years. A legal challenge over trust conditions is a slow and expensive thing. A set of letters in which Diana describes her intentions for her sons in her own handwriting, released at the right moment through the right channel, is something else entirely. It is the kind of document that does not need a court to be devastating. It needs a front page. The palace knows this, and it knew it when it walked into Sandringham in January, which means the decision to proceed anyway was made with that risk fully understood. That is either confidence or desperation, and I am genuinely not certain which one it is. So, let me put the whole thing in front of you because I think it deserves to be seen as one picture rather than a collection of separate details. Diana Spencer spent the last year of her life building something. She built it because she was afraid. She was afraid of the institution she had been married into and then married out of. Afraid of what it would do to the things she loved once she was no longer there to protect them. She put her intentions into legal language and handed them to people she trusted, and she told them, in effect, to hold the line. For nearly 30 years, the line held. Then a man sat down at Sandringham in January with a lawyer he does not normally use and made a decision about a trust condition she had written specifically to protect the son she worried about most. He made that decision in a room with no minutes and no formal record, and he made it at the moment in his life when the urgency of his own mortality was sitting most heavily on him. Harry found out 2 months later. His lawyers are building a paper trail. His independent review is underway. And somewhere in the world, there are people holding letters in Diana's handwriting who have not yet decided whether this is the moment. William is silent. Camila is watching. Charles is waiting to find out whether the door he thought he was closing was actually a door at all, or whether Diana, who understood this institution better than almost anyone who ever lived inside it, had already sealed it from the other side. And Harry, who was 12 years old when he lost her, who spent 30 years looking for her voice in documents and letters and trust conditions she wrote before he was old enough to understand why she was writing them, is now sitting with lawyers in California, working out whether the institution that took his mother is about to take the last formal thing she left him. Diana once said that the establishment she had married into would do anything to protect itself. She said it with the specific authority of someone who had watched it operate at close range for 15 years. She said it with the grief of someone who had tested that proposition personally and found it entirely correct. Her son is testing it again now, from the outside this time, with better lawyers than she had, and with a paper trail she spent the last year of her life starting for him. The meeting at Sandringham lasted approximately 2 hours. The king left for a scheduled engagement in the early afternoon. The legal advisor flew back to London the same evening. The principal private secretary filed nothing, and somewhere in a drawer in a firm of London solicitors, a letter written in Diana's handwriting in the summer of 1996 is waiting to find out whether it is needed. She wrote it for him. She always wrote it for him, and the institution she was writing it against has just reminded every person paying attention exactly why.